Hi there, I'm Dr. Victoria Mattingly, and this is Better Humans at Work. In this week's episode, I talked to Laura Aiken. In a nutshell, Laura Aiken is passionate about helping people thrive. I met Lauren when she was working as a chemical engineer. She spent a decade in the engineering and construction space, working and leading teams on several multi-billion-dollar projects. She led projects to improve learning and development and drive diversity, equity, and inclusion best practices across a population of 4,000 engineers. She has facilitated resiliency training for a construction workforce of over 6,000 people and led diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, including strategic planning, inclusive leadership, and ally action for over 50,000 employees. She's currently a consultant with Thrive Leadership Ltd, specializing in programming, strategy, leadership development, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, resilience, and psychological safety, and particularly helping promote these concepts in highly male-dominated industries. Lauren and I talk about what it means to build resilience, and she shares some really actionable tips and tools that you can use to build resilience into your life. Without further ado, here is me and Laura Aiken talking about how to improve the human experience at work using resilience. Hi, Laura. How are you today?
Hi, Victoria. I'm doing really well. I'm excited to be here, excited to talk
I'm
to you.
I'm so thrilled to have you. And Laura's coming from across the pond. So you are our first international
I
guest on
am.
Better Humans at Work, which is super exciting. And Laura, you and I met when you were still working as an engineer at a very large energy firm. And you recently made a major career transition. I was just curious if you'd share with our audience, what you've been up to in this current transition you're at with your career and your career journey.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been a learning experience for sure, but learning new things every day. Yeah, so let me go back to engineering.
Yes.
Absolutely. I was working in engineering and construction for about 10 years. And I had pieces of my career and pieces of volunteerism that I was doing to working with people, working with the human experience throughout my whole career. And I just kept getting pulled back to people. I kept getting pulled back to culture. And I kept getting pulled back to this idea of, everyone deserves to thrive in their
Mhm.
version of success.
Yes.
So, so I made a decision last year when, everything was happening to just go and pursue it and see what I could do. So in July, I moved back to the UK, which is where I'm from. Not
Mhm.
that I necessarily sound like that. And I started a little bit of a little consultancy, and I'm partnering with a couple of different organizations to build cultures of inclusion and resilience. And what I really love to do is base everything on a foundation of connection and community and build from there. So, working with building authentic connection between people to create inclusive and resilient teams.
Oh, I love that. And can you share a little bit more? You talked a little bit about it, but you mentioned how you've always been really drawn to the people work, the culture work. So what has your professional experience both, as an engineer and now in the consulting work you're doing with improving the human experience at work?
Yeah, okay. While I was an engineer, I actually had an opportunity to work in the corporate function.
Mhm.
So I was still, still had an engineering hat on, but I also had opportunities to branch into learning and development and, what are the competencies and behaviors that we think make up the best engineering teams, and how do we promote diversity and inclusion in engineering, which is obviously, as you know, can be a difficult challenge.
Mhm.
So I was able to do that professionally for 2 years, working in that corporate function. And then on the volunteering space, I actually had a range of leadership roles with our employee resource group, which
Mm.
yeah, so it was an employee resource group for women, 2,000 members, 16 chapters worldwide, and I led that for 18 months on a global basis. Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt, but my clients and others that I work with in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, they have so many questions around how to do ERGs or BRGs, so employee resource groups, business resource groups, essentially these affinity groups where we're
Mhm.
gathering around some shared similarity that we all have. So it's identity based, but Do you have any like lessons learned or just insights for those who are starting these from scratch and just want to do it right? I feel like so many people would benefit from your experience in running that humongous ERG. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, it wasn't a one-woman show. And I think that would be my biggest recommendation is to establish the ecosystem around making that ERG or BRG a success. So that includes who's going to lead it.
Mm-hmm.
That includes executive sponsorship,
Mm-hmm.
executive sponsorship who have some sway in an organization. It includes, some involvement from HR, because if you start something in isolation, it's not going to get traction.
Yeah.
And a little bit of a groundswell of community. So there has to be a pull for it so that it, has that support that starts to actually start it off.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for that. Because I feel like so many companies are
Yeah.
either revamping their ERGs or starting from scratch. And so there's just not enough information out there on best practices in this space. So
Yeah,
thank
which
you
is
for
really
that.
promising because, I mean, coming back to that community and that connection, you don't need to expect huge things from resource groups straight away because they do something very important, even if they are a group of 5 or 10 or, 20, is they're creating a safe space for people of a similar affinity to come together and support each other. And that really contributes towards, a better human experience for those individuals and a more inclusive, supportive environment for them to be able to thrive in.
Oh, I love that. And so you mentioned before your area of specialties and your passion, building that community, but for these outcomes of more resilient and more inclusive teams. How do you define those terms? What does resilience mean to you? What does inclusion mean to you?
Yeah, I'll start with inclusion first because I feel like that's easier. It's not my definition. I like to use the one by Catalyst. So inclusion is uniqueness plus belonging. So it's a place where the people in a team or a culture are able to express themselves authentically and be appreciated for the unique voice that they have, but they also feel a sense of belonging to the bigger group. That's a definition that I resonate with. With resilience, resilience is the ability to flow with life's challenges as opposed to be thrown by them. So
Can you
it's
say that one more time? That is brilliant. Just one more time for our audiences. I love that
one more
so much.
time for the people in the back. Resilience is the ability to flow with life's challenges rather than be thrown by them.
That's amazing. So what does that mean? Like what examples or case studies, like how do you help your clients become more resilient? Because I feel like we could all use more of that,
Yeah.
especially with what we've all been through as a species over the last year. We've lost a lot of control over where we can work, where we can be, what we can do, who we can see. And so like how can we be more resilient? Like share some stories with us, please.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's so necessary. And like anything that's important, it's not quick fixes or easy steps, right? Let me see. So I guess a personal story that I'll share is when my resilience was actually compromised and I was in a construction environment. I was like an extreme minority, being a woman on a construction site. That weighs on you regardless of the intention of, leadership or the corporation in general. Being an only in a lot of circumstances, that is emotionally draining. And what happened with me is, mentally, physically, emotionally, I was compromised and those things were suffering. Yeah, so part of resilience is actually being able to recognize when what you're doing is out of alignment with what you should be doing, or you're exhausting more energy than you're replenishing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I have my own burnout story. My last corporate job I had before I started Mattingly Solutions, I experienced extreme burnout. And looking back, I thought at the time, I thought it was, I just have too much on my plate, right? I am not good at, managing my workflow or saying no. And I just put it all on me as I'm bad at boundaries or something. But looking back on it, No, it's because I was isolated as the only remote worker on my team. I didn't have the greater support I needed. I didn't even realize what was going on because I just put all that onus on myself. And so this like interaction between us and the environment, and the example you shared about being the only, like that does weigh on us. And I feel like we talk about it in these broad terms, especially when in the diversity, equity, inclusion work that I do and that you do as well, about like this that emotional toll and how that
Mm-hmm.
negatively impacts over time. And so with your resilience story, Laura, once you realize and you recognize that, like what did you do to build up some of that resilience, to counteract those feelings that you were experiencing?
Yeah, and you used a key phrase there, right? Build your resilience, because you can do that. It's like a bank. It's like a resiliency supply. You can make deposits into it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I realized, I started making deposits in a lot of different areas of my life. And this looks different for different people.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is a key part of resilience is some sort of, I'll call it embodiment practice, something where you are in your body and out of your head. So that could be, for a lot of people, it's running, or going to the gym. For me, it was yoga. Whatever happens, it takes you out of your head into your body, and you're simply working on your physical and emotional well being through a practice of embodiment. Yeah.
I love that. So it sounds like resilience building is a very like individualized, personal, introspective exercise. I'm curious in your work that when you work with organizations, like how do you like help teams or companies build resilience? Like, is it through coaching? Is it through training? Is it through other mechanisms? But like, how do you actually execute this work at that like team or organizational level?
Yeah. So I think how you can start when you're talking to a team is you focus on the reaction phase. So you're in a stress response, you're up against a deadline, you're, stressed out, anxious, maybe angry, getting mad at people around you. I think people can connect with that quite quickly,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, because a lot of people find themselves in that circumstance. And then talk about what are some ways that you guys have brought yourself out of that in the past. Um, and then start to, in a team environment, talk about, Joe does it this way, Jane does it this way. How about you guys? And kind of start to group them into different ways of regulating out of that state. And then from there, you can start to talk about preventative measures. So you're sitting there in this stress reaction and you're able to bring yourself out of it. But what could you incorporate into your life day to day that brings you further and further and further into a calm and engaged state, that and your energy bank is full?
Yeah, being proactive and not reactive. I feel like that's something we struggle with, especially with the fast-paced nature of the business world and just like this grind, we're always just being reactive. How do we be more proactive? I love that. And something else you said was leveraging the strengths and the different perspectives of the team, right? Like what a great example of that diversity of thought, the importance of having different perspectives and action to learn. And I know with the trainings that I do with my clients, I'm always trying to build in how can we do peer learning, right? How can we have people share what's working for them? Because I know best practices with inclusion and equity and diversity, but I don't know what the culture is like in this organization. I don't live and breathe this every day. And so y'all are going to have better ideas and you can coach each other. And then that also increases the likelihood that they continue those conversations after someone like you or I leave and they continue doing that work. So I love that. Thank you for that example. So for those out there watching, Laura, who want to be more resilient, especially in the context of work, what would be 3 recommendations you have for those who want to build their resiliency?
Cool. Yeah. So, recommendation number one, we talked about being proactive. So, for me, that's like, what are your preventative measures? What are things that make you feel empowered, in control, that are contributing to your energy supply? What are 1, 2, or 3 ways where you can get that energy? Then, how do you incorporate that so you're doing that at least once a week, preferentially once a day, So you're actually building resiliency into your day, building resiliency into your habits. So that would be number one.
What might be some examples of what some of those tools could look like? I know it's going to vary by individual, but what would be some like examples to people get started and figure that out?
Yeah, no, that's a great prompt. Like I said, for me, it's yoga, so it's something that is physical and it's something that I get energy from. For a lot of people, it could be running or going to the gym. It could be social interactions like having a chat with family or yeah, having a supportive friend that you have a little bit of a weekly connection with. It could even be doing something fun like going to a comedy show, or I know that you do some singing as well, right? And it's like make sure that you are building that into your routine so you're not just relying on getting yourself out of a spiral.
Yeah, and it's something I'm actually working with a strategic productivity coach right now because my calendar has been completely unmanageable. And what I've realized is I'm not building that time into my day. And as CEO and as a leader and as someone who has to do a lot of creative work, like I've started to really hold myself accountable in a way that I've never done before. That like if I don't get my walk in, if I don't get my morning yoga in, if I don't give myself some time and space, I'm not doing my company well. I'm not doing my team well. And so trying to create that mindset shift of the same way I would never bail on a client or a partner, I don't want to bail on myself too. So like not only do it, but to keep yourself accountable to actually follow through with it, I
Yeah,
feel like is so
seriously.
important.
You touch on such a good point, and I'll do the second too for
Yes,
sure,
please.
for
Yes.
sure. But yeah, we didn't really talk about that as a benefit of like having a personal resilience. It's not just about how you show up at work, it's how you show up for others. And also as a leader, that's so important, but even as a team member, that's so important, because if you rock into a room and you're in a bad mood and you're stressed out and you're shouting at people, you're instantly bringing the energy of the team down.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Self-awareness is so important. Okay, so that's the first tip. It is a good one. What's number two? What's number two?
Number two is okay, we're talking about this reaction phase. So you're stressed out, you're mad, you're about to fire off some angry emails, you're breathing heavily, you're about to shout at some people. Starting to get some awareness of how that feels in your body when you're in that state. So, how does your body actually respond when you're stressed out? And then use that as a leverage point, as a reminder, as a trigger to pull on your list of things that can bring you out of that state.
So what might be some like bodily triggers that we should watch out for? You mentioned a couple, like, starting to breathe heavy or feeling stressed, but like what does that actually feel like?
Heavy breathing. For a lot of people, it's like a tension in your jaw or like a tension in your shoulders. A lot of people will feel like quite tight in their chest or a churning in your gut. It can be really different for a lot of people. But again, like there's such a huge connection between your physical body and your emotional state. And you can use each one to, improve the other.
I love that. And then, like, we're humans at work. I think we forget that we have these bodies that we need to take care of. And there's these signals that we get that we're just ignoring throughout the day because we're just powering through. And so it's such a great reminder to check in with ourselves as humans and use that to our advantage. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Notice when you're feeling like that, understand that it's a trigger for you to go and do something. And then have a list of things that can pull you out of it. Like I have a list, I call them tiny power plays, that just help me regain a little bit of sense of control and purpose and intentionality, and that just makes me feel good straight away. So again, it could be talking to a friend, it could be taking a deep breath, it could be watching a cat video. It's like pulling you out.
I honestly love dancing, just like a little bit. And I usually reserve my like private dance parties for when I have a big win, right? Because I have my own home office, and so I don't look like a crazy person dancing around in a public space. But next time I feel stressed, maybe I'll try dancing and see if that helps get me out of it. I love.
Yes. Just an impromptu ABBA dance party. Like that's the one that universally helps everyone.
And what about the third tip for building resilience?
Yeah, the third tip is to build and invest in communities.
Mm.
So, in the workplace, that can look like we talked about business resource groups and employee resource groups. Outside of the workplace, it can be, support networks, circles, even family chats. But increasing those spaces where people can be vulnerable and connect with each other authentically and have a shoulder to cry on or a wall to vent at. That's so important in building inclusive and resilient workplaces. And that requires a little bit of, support and nurturing and investment to get them to a point.
Of course, of course. I mean, we are such social creatures, and I think that's why a lot of us have been struggling so much with what COVID's done to kind of upend a lot of our initial social interactions and outlets that we don't have as much access to right now. And so,
Yeah.
and lean into virtual. I know we're all zoomed out, but you're one of those people for me, Laura. And you and I have never been physically in the same room together, right?
I
But
know.
you can still create these like meaningful, authentic, resilience building connections even in the virtual world. And one silver lining of COVID is that those geographic barriers that we used to falsely think were keeping us apart are now all been lifted, and we're all just one quick Zoom or
Yeah.
phone call away.
Our worlds are so much bigger in a whole different way. Like smaller because, we're maybe not traveling as much, but we have access to so many more people and things virtually now. Yeah, it's a real opportunity.
Thank you for teaching our audience what it means to be inclusive and resilient. I encourage you all there to take Laura's tips and take them to heart and build resilience in your life. Laura, how can people find you if they want to get in touch and continue to follow the work that you do?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn is probably best and most active there. So it's Laura C. Aiken. And you can get my company's website as well, which is thriveleadership.net.
Thank you so much for helping us thrive and
Thank
everything
you.
you do. It's been an honor to have you today.
Thank
And
you.
of
I'll see you
course,
for an ABBA dance party soon, huh?
yes, I would love that. I would love that. And then, yes, dance parties, impromptu, anytime. Thank you for
Awesome.
all you do, Laura, to improve the human experience at work and help us be better humans at work.